Chapter 1. The Archive. I worked for a law firm for 3 years as a records clerk. My job was straightforward: maintain the physical archive in the basement, retrieve files when attorneys needed them, ensure everything was properly cataloged and stored.
The basement archive was a large room, climate-controlled, row upon row of metal shelving, holding decades of case files going back to the firm's founding in 1961. It was quiet down there.
It was exactly the kind of job I needed at that point in my life. The archive had a peculiarity that nobody mentioned when I started. I discovered it myself in my second week when I was reorganizing a section of shelving that had gotten out of order. At the far back of the archive, past the last row of active files, there was a section that wasn't in the catalog, not misfiled, simply not listed anywhere. A full row of shelving, maybe 40 linear feet of files, that appeared on no inventory and had no index cards in the catalog drawers. The files themselves were in the same format as everything else: manila folders, paper documents, the standard firm filing system. But the case names on the folders were different. Not case names at all, actually. Each folder was labeled with a person's name and a date. Last name, first name, a date ranging from 1963 to 1987. About 200 folders in total. I opened one. I shouldn't have. I was curious and I was alone, and it was a Wednesday afternoon. The file contained documentation of a person, their address, their workplace, their daily routine, their family members, their financial situation. Typed pages, some handwritten notes, what appeared to be surveillance notes describing a person's movements over a period of weeks. No case number, no attorney's name, no indication of why this person was being documented or for whom. I closed the file and put it back and went back to my regular work and didn't think about it for several days. Then I started thinking about it and couldn't stop. I went back and looked at more of them. They were all the same. Individual people, documented in detail, routines and relationships and finances, surveillance notes, all dated between 1963 and 1987, all unlabeled beyond the person's name and date. I asked the senior records clerk, a woman who had been with the firm for 20 years, about the unlabeled section. She looked at me for a moment without expression. Then she said she didn't know what I was talking about. I offered to show her. She said that wasn't necessary, and that I should focus on the cataloged files and leave anything that wasn't in the catalog alone. I left it alone. I worked at the firm for another 2.5 years and never went back to that section. When I left, I thought about whether to tell someone, a journalist, a regulatory body, someone. I don't know why exactly. Partly because I don't know what those files represent, and partly because I still don't know who is in them. But sometimes I think about those 200 names, 200 people who were watched and documented between 1963 and 1987 by a law firm that has never acknowledged those files exist. I think about whether any of them knew. I think about whether whatever was being documented is finished, or whether it simply moved somewhere that doesn't leave paper records. Chapter 2. The Frequency. My brother worked as a radio engineer at a small AM station for 4 years. Not a glamorous job, maintaining equipment, monitoring signal levels, making sure the broadcast stayed within regulatory parameters. He worked mostly alone, odd hours, the kind of job that most people don't know exists. The station broadcast a standard format, talk radio during the day, overnight programming that ran automatically from a playout system. My brother's overnight shift involved monitoring the automated broadcast and responding to any technical issues. Most nights nothing happened. In his second year, he started noticing an anomaly in the signal. Between 2 and 3 a.m., intermittently, the signal would show a brief modulation that wasn't coming from the playout system. Not a technical fault. The signal was clean, the equipment was functioning correctly, the modulation was deliberate. It lasted between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. Always in the same frequency window, always between 2 and 3 a.m., never at any other time. He ran diagnostics. He checked for interference sources. He contacted the regulatory body's technical division and described the anomaly. They said they'd look into it and never followed up. He started recording the anomalous signals separately to analyze it. When he played it back at different speeds, he realized it was structured, not random interference, something with internal pattern and repetition. He couldn't decode it. He wasn't trained in that kind of analysis. He sent samples to a friend who had worked in signals intelligence and asked him to listen without giving context. His friend called him back the same day. He asked where my brother had obtained the recording. My brother explained. His friend was quiet for a moment. Then he said the signal had characteristics consistent with a low-power clandestine transmitter, and that the structure suggested it was encoded. He said he couldn't say more than that, and that my brother should stop recording it. My brother stopped recording it. He mentioned it to the station manager, who listened with the particular expression of someone choosing not to engage, and said he'd look into it. The anomalous signal continued until my brother left the job. He never found out what it was or who was transmitting it. He never found out if the regulatory body or the station manager ever actually looked into it. He thinks about it sometimes, about what was being encoded and sent on a small AM frequency between 2 and 3 a.m. for years, and who was listening for it, and whether they're still transmitting somewhere now. Chapter 3. The room off the lobby. I worked in a large office building for several years, mid-level administrative role, the kind of position that requires you to know the building well, but doesn't give you access to everything. The building had 22 floors, and the usual architecture of a large commercial property: elevators, stairwells, conference rooms, a lobby with a security desk. There was a door off the main lobby that I noticed in my first week. Unmarked, standard commercial door, positioned between the security desk and the elevator bank. I assumed it was a utility room or a security office. After a few months, I realized I had never seen it open, not once, in all the times I had passed through that lobby, which was multiple times a day for months. I had never seen that door open or anyone go in or out of it. I asked the security guard at the desk about it during a slow afternoon. He glanced at the door and said it was a mechanical room. I said I'd never seen anyone go in there. He said maintenance had their own access schedule. He said it with the tone of someone who had answered this question before and didn't want to answer it again. I started paying attention to that door the way you pay attention to something once you've decided it's interesting. Over the following months, I never saw it open. I never heard sounds from behind it. But I noticed two things. First, the door was always slightly warmer to the touch than the surrounding wall. Not dramatically, but consistently, the way a door gets warm when there's something generating heat on the other side. Second, the security guard at the desk always positioned his chair so that his back was to the door. Every guard, every shift, I watched for it deliberately. None of them ever sat facing the door. I mentioned this to a colleague who had been in the building longer than me. She looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. Later, over lunch, she said she'd heard the room had been sealed in the 1990s after some kind of incident she didn't know the details of. She said she'd heard it from someone who'd heard it from someone else, and she didn't know if it was true. She said she'd stopped thinking about it because she had to walk past that door twice a day, and it was easier not to. I left the building for a different job about a year later. On my last day, I walked past the door one final time and put my hand flat on the surface. Warm, exactly as it had always been. Whatever was in there generating heat had been doing so for as long as I had worked there, and probably much longer. I have wondered since whether the warmth means the room is in use, or whether whatever was sealed in there in the 1990s simply hasn't cooled down yet.